It was one of those perfect summer afternoons, the kind that feels like it was handcrafted by nature just for relaxation. The sun sat high in a cloudless blue sky, casting a warm, golden light over the park. The air was soft and easy, carrying the faint hum of cicadas in the distance. A light breeze swayed the leaves in the tall oaks, making a gentle rustling sound that mixed with the joyful shouts of children playing. On the far side of the park, the Johnson family had claimed a small, shaded patch of grass. It wasn't anything elaborate, just enough space for a couple of folding chairs, a small picnic table, and a portable charcoal grill. Mr. Johnson, tall and calm in his demeanor, stood by the grill with tongs in hand, flipping burgers with the ease of a man who had done this dozens of times before. Each sizzle was followed by a soft puff of smoke, carrying with it the mouth-watering scent of seasoned meat. Mrs. Johnson, stylish but relaxed in a wide-brimmed straw hat and oversized sunglasses, unpacked the cooler. Inside was a perfect spread: bottles of cold lemonade, containers of potato salad, fresh fruit, and even a homemade peach cobbler for dessert. She hummed along quietly to the music playing from a small Bluetooth speaker. Upbeat tunes at just the right volume, enough to give the moment some life without disturbing anyone nearby. The Johnson children, a boy and a girl, played an energetic game of catch a few feet away. The football was slightly worn and a little underinflated, but that didn't stop their laughter from filling the air. Every now and then, one of them would run back to the table for a sip of lemonade before diving right back into their game. It was an ordinary family moment, wholesome, peaceful, and joyful. From a distance, anyone passing by might smile at the scene. This was exactly what a public park was meant for. People enjoying the outdoors, making memories, and sharing food with loved ones. But not everyone saw it that way. Somewhere else in the park, sitting alone on a bench, a person was watching. Their eyes lingered on the Johnson family, not with warmth, but with suspicion. Maybe it was because this park was in a predominantly white neighborhood. Maybe it was because the Johnsons didn't look like the kind of people they expected to see here. Whatever their reason, it wasn't based on anything the Johnsons had done, just the fact of who they were. After a moment of staring, the person reached into their bag and pulled out a cell phone. They pressed it to their ear, and in a steady but loaded tone, they told the 911 dispatcher, "Yes, I'd like to report suspicious activity." When the dispatcher asked for details, the caller described a group setting up in the park and hinted that they might be doing something they shouldn't. There was no mention of a barbecue, no acknowledgement of the obvious innocence of the scene. The caller didn't have to say much. Their vague language and the undertone in their voice were enough to set things in motion. Back at their picnic spot, the Johnsons knew nothing of the phone call. They were too busy laughing at a joke one of the kids had told, too focused on whether the chicken wings on the grill were cooked through. But miles away at a police station, an officer was already being dispatched to check on a suspicious situation at the park. Tires squealed softly as a patrol car pulled out, making its way toward the location. The officers inside didn't yet know who they were going to find, only that a complaint had been made. The Johnsons' laughter, the warm smell of barbecue, the soft music, it was all about to be interrupted. They couldn't see it coming, but trouble was already on its way, fueled by nothing more than bias and a phone call that should never have been made. In just a few minutes, a normal Saturday afternoon would take a sharp, uncomfortable turn. The Johnsons were in the middle of what felt like a perfect afternoon when they noticed the first sign that something had shifted in the air. It began quietly, the faint hum of an engine growing louder. From their spot in the park, they could see a white and blue patrol car rolling slowly along the paved path that wound between the grassy fields. It wasn't unusual for police to drive through public spaces every now and then, but this car wasn't just passing by. It was moving deliberately toward them. The engine cut off, and the stillness that followed was strangely heavy. Two uniformed officers stepped out. Both wore dark sunglasses, their expressions unreadable. Their eyes swept across the park, over the kids playing on the swings, past the jogger tying his shoe, and then fixed squarely on the Johnson family. Mr. Johnson noticed it immediately. His hand, still holding the barbecue tongs, froze mid-flip. "Looks like we have company," he murmured to his wife. The two officers walked with a slow, deliberate pace, the kind that carried authority but also a certain unspoken judgment. When they reached the picnic area, one of them spoke first. "Afternoon," the taller officer said, his voice clipped and official. "You folks have a permit for that grill?" Mr. Johnson, calm and polite, gestured toward a wooden signpost a few feet away. "Yes, officer. This park has public barbecue pits. It's allowed. You can see the rules posted right there." The officer didn't even glance at the sign. Instead, he pulled a small notepad from his pocket. "We still need to see some ID." Mrs. Johnson frowned. "Our IDs? For cooking lunch. It's standard procedure." The shorter officer replied quickly, though his tone carried no warmth. He looked over at the Johnson children, who had stopped their game of catch and were now watching nervously. "And kids, sit down, all right? Don't move around so much." That last part made Mrs. Johnson's eyes widen. She stepped forward slightly, protective instinct kicking in. "They're just playing," she said firmly. The taller officer adjusted his sunglasses. "Ma'am, we're just trying to make sure everything checks out here." It was clear from the way they stood, feet planted wide, hands hovering near their belts, that this was not going to be a quick or friendly interaction. Their questions didn't feel like routine checks. They felt loaded. Mr. Johnson reached for his wallet, but his voice stayed steady. "I'll show you my ID. But before I do, I'd like to understand, did someone complain about us?" The officers exchanged a quick glance, the kind of silent communication that says, "Don't answer that." One of them spoke again, avoiding the question entirely. "This is just about making sure people here are supposed to be here. You understand." The words landed heavily. "Supposed to be here." It was as if they were hinting that the Johnson family's very presence in the park needed justification. Around them, a few park visitors had started to notice. A woman walking her dog slowed her pace. Two teenagers at a nearby picnic table turned their heads to watch. The tension in the air was palpable, though no one intervened. Mrs. Johnson quietly slipped her phone from her purse and tapped the record button. "For our safety," she whispered to her husband. The shorter officer noticed immediately. His jaw tightened. "Ma'am, you don't need to record this. We're just having a conversation." "With all due respect," Mrs. Johnson replied, "I think we do." That small act, pulling out the phone, seemed to change the officer's body language. Their voices grew a little sharper, their questions more pointed. One officer stepped closer to Mr. Johnson. That small act, pulling out the phone, seemed to change the officer's body language. Their voices grew a little sharper, their questions more pointed. One officer stepped closer to Mr. Johnson, closing the gap in a way that felt less like procedure and more like intimidation. "What exactly are you doing here today?" he asked, even though the answer was obvious. A family picnic, food on the grill, kids playing. Inside, Mr. Johnson felt his patience being tested. He'd dealt with confrontations before in his professional life, many far more dangerous than this. But there was something infuriating about standing there in front of his children, being treated like a suspect for simply enjoying a Saturday afternoon. What the officers didn't know was that they had just stepped into a situation far bigger than they realized. In a few moments, their assumptions would collide head-on with reality, and the power dynamic in this encounter would flip in an instant. For now, though, the Johnson family stood under the unrelenting gaze of two men who saw a problem where none existed. And somewhere in the back of Mr. Johnson's mind, he could feel the heat of the moment rising, hotter than the coals on his grill. The air around the picnic table felt heavier now. The Johnson family's afternoon, once filled with laughter and the smell of barbecue, was now tangled in the sharp edge of confrontation. The two officers had moved in closer. Their once casual postures now carried a quiet aggression. One stood just a few feet from Mr. Johnson, his boots planted firmly in the grass, his hand resting just close enough to his holster to make a statement. The other positioned himself slightly to the side, watching both Mrs. Johnson and the children. Mr. Johnson handed over his driver's license. "Here you go, officer," he said evenly. "I'm cooperating, but I'd still like to know why you singled us out." The taller officer didn't answer right away. He studied the license for a little longer than necessary before passing it to his partner, who took out a small notepad and scribbled something down. "Like I said, The taller one replied finally, "Just making sure everyone here belongs here." Mrs. Johnson's voice carried a sharpness now. "Belongs here? This is a public park. We pay taxes like everyone else." The shorter officer shifted his weight. "Ma'am, if you could just calm down." That did it. Mrs. Johnson straightened her back. "I am calm. Well, I'm not as comfortable with you treating us like criminals in front of our children." The kids, sensing the tension, had gone silent. They sat close together on one of the folding chairs, eyes darting between their parents and the officers. The football they'd been tossing earlier now lay forgotten on the grass. The taller officer spoke again, his tone clipped. "Ma'am, this can go in two ways. You cooperate, or we call for backup." Mr. Johnson felt a knot form in his stomach. He was no stranger to law enforcement tactics. In fact, he knew them better than most. But standing here, in plain view of his children, the knowledge that this could escalate quickly was more real than ever. Mrs. Johnson, still holding her phone, kept recording. "If you're going to threaten to bring more officers, then you should know this is being documented," she said. "Every word, every action." The shorter officer smirked, but his partner's jaw tightened. "You really want to go down this road?" the taller one asked. Mr. Johnson took a slow breath. He wasn't afraid. Not exactly, but he was calculating. Every second of this encounter was a test. Of patience, of composure, of dignity. He decided to give them one more chance to back down. "Officers, I'm telling you right now, you're making a mistake. You're assuming something about me, about my family, that isn't true." "Then explain," the shorter officer challenged. That was the moment the mood shifted inside Mr. Johnson's head. He realized the only way this was going to end was if he stopped letting them control the narrative. "Explain," he repeated, taking a small step forward. His voice stayed calm, but there was a new weight to it. "All right, I'll explain. But when I do, you're going to wish you'd handled this differently." The taller officer crossed his arms, clearly not expecting anything dramatic. "Go ahead." Mr. Johnson reached slowly into his back pocket. Both officers' hands twitched toward their belts, a sign of just how ready they were to assume the worst. He pulled out a sleek black leather badge holder. It was closed at first, resting in his hand like a small, harmless wallet. Then, with a deliberate motion, he flipped it open. Inside, gleaming in the afternoon light, was his FBI special agent credential. The taller officer's lips parted, but no words came out. The shorter one blinked twice, as if unsure what he was looking at. "That's right," Mr. Johnson said, his voice steady. "I'm a federal agent. And before you ask, yes, I have my body cam on right now. Every second of this conversation is being recorded." Silence. The kind of silence that feels heavier than any noise. The park, the children, the grill, all of it seemed to fade for a moment as the reality of the situation hit the two officers like a punch they never saw coming. And standing there, with the sun warm on his back and the badge shining in his hand, Mr. Johnson knew the power dynamic had just flipped completely. The taller officer's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His partner's eyes flickered between the badge and Mr. Johnson's face, as if trying to process the collision between their assumptions and reality. "That's right," Mr. Johnson said again, his voice steady but edged with authority. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Johnson. And I want to be very clear, this entire encounter is being documented. On my device, on my body cam, and now on my wife's phone." For a long second, neither officer moved. The summer breeze rustled the leaves overhead, the only sound in the silence that had fallen over the small corner of the park. Mrs. Johnson lowered her sunglasses just enough to look both men in the eye. "Still want to call for backup?" she asked coolly. The taller officer cleared his throat, tried to regain some composure. "Well, Agent Johnson, we were just responding to a call. Someone reported suspicious activity here. So," Mr. Johnson cut him off, his tone calm but firm. "So you decided to walk up on a family barbecue, ignore the posted park rules, and interrogate my children. You didn't come here to check facts. You came here with assumptions. And now, those assumptions are going into my official report." The shorter officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his partner as if looking for a way out of the conversation. "We didn't mean any disrespect, sir. Just doing our jobs." Mr. Johnson stepped closer, just enough that his shadow fell across the shorter man. I work with police departments all over this country. I know what doing your job looks like. And I also know what profiling looks like. This, he gestured toward his family, is the latter. The officers exchanged another quick, silent glance, but their earlier confidence was gone. Their shoulders weren't as straight. Their voices had lost their edge. Mrs. Johnson, still recording, added, "You asked my kids to sit down like they were suspects. You tried to tell me to stop filming. And now you're acting like this was just a friendly visit? Please." The squad car had barely disappeared from sight when the stillness of the park began to creep back in. It was as if the tension had been vacuumed out, leaving only the faint hum of the summer day behind. The Johnsons didn't speak for a moment, not because they didn't have anything to say, but because they were all still processing what had just happened. Mrs. Johnson set her phone down on the picnic table, the recording still saved safely in her camera roll. The kids exchanged glances, trying to read their parents' faces. They were too young to understand all the layers of what had happened, but old enough to feel the weight of it. "Are they coming back?" the youngest finally asked. Mr. Johnson shook his head with certainty. "No, they're gone." He said it in a way that reassured them, but also carried another meaning. "And they won't be bothering us again today." Slowly, the family turned back to their food. The grill still gave off gentle heat, and the smell of the chicken wings and burgers was just as inviting as before. It was almost surreal. Minutes earlier, the space around them had been thick with suspicion and confrontation, and now here they were, simply eating. But even as they tried to return to normal, Mr. Johnson knew this wasn't something to brush off. Not this time. He sat down, plate in hand, and took a slow bite before speaking. "You know," he said, "most people who go through something like that don't have the chance to change the narrative. They don't have a badge to pull out or the resources to hold someone accountable." Mrs. Johnson nodded, her eyes fixed on him. "Which is exactly why we have to do something with this." By this, she meant the footage, the clear, undeniable record of what had taken place. The tone in the officers' voices, the way they ignored the posted rules, the assumption that this family didn't belong, the intimidation toward the kids. It was all there, captured in crisp, unforgiving clarity. So after they finished their meal, they didn't just pack up and go home. They stayed long enough to let the kids play again, reclaiming the joy that had been interrupted. They laughed on purpose, not because they felt lighthearted, but because they refused to let that incident steal the rest of their day. Later that evening, once they were home and the kids were settled, Mrs. Johnson uploaded the video to her social media. Not with a rant, not with insults, just a calm, factual caption explaining what happened. "Today, my family was harassed by 2 police officers while having a legal barbecue in our neighborhood park. My husband, who is an FBI special agent, revealed his identity only after they insisted on treating us like we didn't belong. This is what profiling looks like." Within hours, the post began to spread, first among friends and family, then to local community pages, and before long, it was being shared by people the Johnsons had never met. The view count climbed into the thousands. Comments poured in, some offering support, some expressing outrage, and many sharing their own similar experiences. By the next morning, the story had been picked up by a local news outlet. They blurred the children's faces but played enough of the video to show the key moments. The officers demanding IDs, telling the kids to sit, and the moment Mr. Johnson revealed his badge. It wasn't just the twist that made the clip go viral. It was the deeper truth behind it. As Mr. Johnson later told a reporter who visited their home, "This isn't about me being an FBI agent. That just happened to be the thing that stopped it in this case. What about the people who don't have that? What about the families who go through this and can't do anything to stop it?" His words struck a chord. Civil rights organizations reached out, offering support and asking to use the video for training materials. Local activists began pushing the police department to review its officers' conduct and provide better anti-bias training. The police department issued a statement within 2 days, claiming they were reviewing the incident and committed to fair and equal treatment for all residents. But for many in the community, the damage was already done. People weren't just talking about this one encounter. They were talking about a pattern. And in the middle of it all, the Johnson family kept living their lives. They didn't hide. They didn't retreat from public spaces. If anything, they became more visible, attending community events, speaking at town hall meetings, and encouraging others to document and report similar incidents. Mr. Johnson summed it up best during a neighborhood gathering where he was asked if he wished the incident had never happened. Do I wish my kids didn't have to see that? Absolutely. Do I wish people didn't jump to conclusions because of the color of our skin? Of course. But the reality is, it did happen, and we turn it into something that can help change the way people think and act. That's how you take back your power. The video eventually reached hundreds of thousands of views online. Some watched for the twist. Others stayed for the message. And somewhere, perhaps even in that same police department, officers saw the clip and felt that uncomfortable but necessary twinge of self-reflection. For the Johnsons, the lesson was simple but powerful. You can't always control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond. And sometimes, your response can echo far beyond the moment itself. That Saturday afternoon began with sunshine, barbecue, and laughter. It was interrupted by prejudice and intimidation, but it ended with resolve, visibility, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that they had not just stood their ground. They had shifted it,